What criteria do you use to determine if a resource is appropriate for your online classroom? There's lots of resources out there. Some of them are great, some of them are interesting. So I'd love to hear from you about what criteria do you use to determine if a resource is appropriate for your classroom.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you so much for also explaining about coaching because I forgot that I said that without giving any indication as to what that was. So thank you. One of the important things is, does it accomplish the task or the target of the language learning that you have set out for your assignment? Also, we like to make sure that it's roughly 90%-ish comprehensible by students if it is going to be just independent reading. Also, for NCVPS, we have a blessing and a curse where all of our materials have to make sure that they are copyright free. We can't just post anything up there. We have to have a source, and now we often have to have those resources be on a United States webpage and not from another country. So we have a lot of criteria we have to meet before we can utilize it in our courses. So we have to utilize those things. We've also looked at things like text readers, and some of you mentioned some other text readers today that I'm going to try after we finish this meeting, because the ones we've tried so far to utilize in our course to just do a text to speech read aloud in Japanese have not been good pronunciation for us so far. So I'm interested to learn about the other tools that you have all mentioned to see if those work better for us.
Yes, absolutely. And as I said, some resources are great, some of them are maybe not so great, and some we just can't use at all. And another thing that I just wanted to throw out there, just in my travels, it's something very near and dear to my heart, is my mother was a special education teacher for many, many years, but just making sure that we're using UDL standards and focusing on accessibility, as Revae and I are both in a K-12 environment. So that's another great criteria that we have to use as well. Is just making sure that it's available and accessible for all of our students. And if it doesn't reach all of our students, maybe it's not the best fit for us. But there's just so many things. And you did a great job, Revae, on touching on some of the important criteria for us. So thank you for that. And let's go to Maeda Sensei. What criteria do you use to determine if a resource is appropriate for your online classroom?
Well, when you say resources, I can think of so many resources. Like, for example, first one is a facilitator, TA. So some other teachers mentioned that online environments, it's so difficult to have access to the native speakers. But usually universities, they might have a international student from Japan. So I always utilize those. So I for my Zoom class, I have a native Japanese speaking student as a facilitator. So that during the breakout room, or we have a two breakout room opened, one with the facilitator, one with me. And then also I utilize the facilitator as a cultural resource. What's going on in Japan? What do the university student do over the weekend? Those things that I'm not, I'm not really familiar with now anymore. So I use them as a great human resources. And then the what determines if a the resource is appropriate. Okay, so thank you for mentioning about accessibility. This is particularly true for the technological resources. So I always think, can student access it on different device, like smartphone or tablet? Many students complete the assignment using the smartphone. So can they see it, clearly? And then also, like too many downloads. Like, so can they get by without having to download 5 different apps, or I avoid anything that requires too many logins or external apps, unless necessary. So keep it simple. And for the technology use, I limit myself to introducing just 1 or 2 new technological tool per semester so that students don't get overwhelmed. And then as for the learning resources, like Saito sensei, my classroom is a flipped classroom, so that asynchronous session, students needs to learn the new grammar and vocabulary. So flip lesson, usually we use a video. grammar learning video. So that video, make sure it's less than 10 minutes long. Well, 10 minutes is even long, right? So that make sure it's really short and concise. And I also provide them the multiple resources. And well, there's no absolutely one perfect, video to explain this, grammar part perfectly. So I usually give them some choices, or there's, two other great ones. So you choose. And also, if you don't like watching the video, you can still read the textbook explanation, or this website explains well, or you can ask AI to explain. So I will give them lots of choices. And then, so that, and as for the learning resources, that I think about the flexibility across the task. What do you mean by flexibility? That's something I can build up or simplify depending on the level, language level, because I'm teaching two different levels. So can I use this resource for both levels? Can I, flexibly use that? And also, can I use this material for all three modes of communications? That would be wonderful. And can I reuse this material, reuse often multiple contexts, like just like I mentioned across the different, students level. So those are really important. And also cultural relevance and engagement. Is this learning material, culturally rich, and it's really engaging for the students? And scaffolding, we discussed about the scaffolding, right? So is this material have a scaffolding potential? Maybe this is a great material, but there's no way I can come up with a good scaffolding, activities, then I'm not going to use it. So these are the things I usually consider. But like you mentioned, accessibility and the universal design and copyrights, they are really, really important too. Thank you.
These are all really important things to consider. And you also touched upon reusability. And I love the idea of finding resources that work for multiple things, maybe even multiple modes of communication. And you also touched upon the overwhelm. And while we might have a million different tools, we might want to cherry pick different things for it. Our students do get overwhelmed. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping them engaged and coming back every day to keep learning Japanese with us. So we don't want to do too much with technology. It's a balance, and we kind of have to find the right mix with everything. So thank you for that, Maeda sensei. And Saito sensei, let's move on to you. And once again, the question is, what criteria do you use to determine if a resource is appropriate for your online classroom?
All right, the word appropriate, like I guess this is the online course. So like to me, like online teaching is the college level, but the appropriate, I often like hear at the K-12 settings, that's my secondary. So, but I guess this is the online. So, and I'm not so worried about level appropriate. It's more like, this authentic materials can be used for my goal or like objective of the today's like lesson. And so, and also at the beginning of my class, I tell them about just keep thinking, not stop. And when it comes to like without knowing kanji or like grammar, it doesn't matter. Like you see the context clues using. That's like building their interpretive communication skills and works best with the authentic materials for sure. So this summer, like last month, I participated 2-day workshop it's hosted by the New York State Education Department. And the New York State Education Department like modified like World Readiness Standard, National Standard into their World Language Standard. So like they modified recently. So like the teachers at the New York State K-12 teachers, we have to learn how to use the authentic materials. And I wanted to introduce to you because it actually helped my summer course, which I'm teaching right now, an online course. And it's the methodology called chunking. And like I often use like the Tokyo Metro public rule posters, and it's like with the image and like illustration and Japanese writings, it's great. Like we talks about like public rules, but for them, they have to make sure everybody understand. So they have to put English, sometimes Chinese, and like on the poster. So what am I supposed to use those like, with the English, like it's apparently like talks about the public rules in Japan. So like, with this New York State chunking things, they said it's okay to use a part of the authentic materials, not modifying. It's the part of the authentic materials or like covers, like when you don't want to use. So like giving them with using this chunking technique and giving the student which part they have to like more put the attention on. So I decided to use, this works for the college student even. So, and I decided to put a lots of chunking. So like I'm giving them like the authentic materials and without being overwhelmed. So, and I wanted to introduce this one. And then this is my goal, not the sentence structure, okay? And the public rules, and gradually at the end, like they have to tell themselves support that the Japanese students are coming to New York City and they have to take the subway, but they get used to the Japanese subway system and what they can learn, to the Japanese student. So with using this poster, and we learned more like the cultural background, and actually like one of my students who recently went to Japan, they said, why Japanese subways and public transportation are so quiet? Everybody are not talking about like anything, like they are very quiet, even like less crowded train. So, and like we can learn those things from like this authentic materials, and we can bring this into the discussion, and also they can compare with what's gonna what's happened to like in New York City. What about in New York City? So this one like leads naturally cultural reflection. So like I am a big fan of using authentic materials, and I also like would like to like at the end would like to mention about Canva. I don't know like if you use Canva or not, but the Canva like those are can be authentic materials, right? So like I changed the setting of the Canva in Japanese, so it picks up a lot of like Japanese like posters or like the izakaya menu or like the travel agency flyer, and I use Canva as a practice. For example, like comparing two things or among this menu, which one do you like the best? And I just brings a lot of Canva images to the classroom, because it just like simply by viewing those like izakaya menu, it like really tastes like looks good and like makes my myself hungry as well. And I think the learning will be more memorable. So I use these menus, not the alcohol part, but like, the comparing ramen's menu or like yakitori menu, like even in my secondary class as well. So student loved like using the Canva like images, and I like, well, maybe like some people say like, the Canva is not authentic materials, but it's okay. Like I use it anyway, and my student loves them. So, and I always have like bunch of resources on my Canva folder, so I can use occasionally. Thank you.
Excellent. And yes, as you said earlier, it's really important to think about what is the objective, right? Sometimes we can kind of get lost in the weeds, especially if we have some fancy new technology tool. We have to think about what's the objective. And I love that you're making all these great real world connections. And, these are the things that keep the students enrolled. We want to not just have them for level 1 and 2. Hopefully, we have them for levels 3, 4, beyond clear into university. We want to keep them as long as possible. So by making those connections, you're making it more memorable. Thank you for that, Saito Sensei. And we'll go to Love Sensei. Again, the same question. What criteria do you use to determine if a resource is appropriate for your online classroom?
Yes, I think I'll just be, echoing some things that other people said, but I think, the task is important here, right? Does the material match like what I want my learners to be doing at this point? Um, and as I mentioned with like those katakana scanning activities I mentioned, right? Like learners have way less than 80% of the vocabulary in that one. But for the purpose for how we're using it, like it works fine. So I think keeping the purpose in mind is important. I kind of like to push my students, so I'll sometimes give them readings where they understand probably less than 80%. And they're going to have to read through it more than once, and they're going to have to use some strategies to try and figure out what they can. But I like to give them some more difficult readings at some point. So, it just kind of depends. I think most materials can be used somewhere. It just kind of depends on what you're focused on, and what you're wanting to get the students to do. Depending on how you approach AI tools, I think there's just so much that's accessible right now. To give an example, here at Konan University, where I'm at in Japan right now, recently had a discussion with a teacher, and one of the things we decided to do is to have all the communication from the teachers be in Japanese from like day one, even for students with like zero Japanese. And then there's a little blurb at the end of that that says, I recommend using DeepL. A lot of people like ChatGPT. Use what you need to figure out what's going on here. And reply in Japanese if you can. If you need to, if you don't feel comfortable with that yet because you've had zero Japanese so far, you can reply in English if you need to. But, just we're kind of in an age where we can do that. We can just start using Japanese, at least with the written language, from the very beginning, and students can, use the tools that they've got to figure out what's going on. So just to kind of make the point that there's just so much that is accessible for students right now. There's a lot that they can do with what's out there. One last thing that I'll mention is Saito Sensei mentioned like modification of materials. Where I find myself doing that the most actually is with pedagogical materials that I want to use in my classroom. A lot of times those will come, you'll get your text, right? And then at the bottom, there'll be this word box that has like, the words that show up and, what the readings are and what the English meanings are. I'll usually just like take that out and give my students the reading because I don't want them to like, be jumping down to the word box. They're not going to have a word box when they're reading something real anyway. I want them to be thinking about, context. Like, what do I know about this reading? What is that going to tell me about this part that I don't understand? How can I take what I've got, my real world knowledge, my knowledge from the text, and use that to fill in the gaps? So that's something that I'll do to kind of adjust materials. But like I said, that's mostly with pedagogical materials that I want to use. The authentic materials, I usually just use them as is. But it kind of depends on the task we're doing.
Right. We don't want our students to depend on that word box that won't be there whenever they actually have to use what they're learning in the real world. Excellent points. Thank you for that.